If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here. They remember them. I'd love to know. Where are you tuning in from? And what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I'm Owen Maddox, and this started when I was 28. I wasn't an outdoorsman, not in the way people romanticize. I hiked occasionally, mostly for the photos, and I knew how to read a map well enough not to embarrass myself. But my cousin Jamie, he lived for it. Backcountry routes, rock scrambles, solo treks in weather that would scare off rangers. We weren't close, but we had that weird kind of bond cousins sometimes do. Someone you only see at holidays, but when they text out of the blue, you always reply. So when Jamie went missing in Devil's Run, a heavily wooded gulch tucked into the Allegheny Highlands of Western Virginia, I didn't hesitate to drive down. He had been attempting a 4-day loop trail alone, something he'd done before. Only this time, he didn't check in. No GPS ping. No return. The search lasted a week. They found his car at the unmarked trailhead, gear still in the back seat, and his last phone photo, a blurry image of faint glowing dots between trees at dusk. Authorities blamed disorientation, exposure, a fall, but Jamie was meticulous. He logged every route. He double-checked terrain. He wasn't the kind of guy to get lost. I knew something was wrong. 2 weeks after they called off the search, his mother gave me a box of his stuff. Most of it was what you'd expect: headlamps, topo maps, a thermos that smelled like stale coffee. But at the bottom was a folded piece of notebook paper. It wasn't a map. Not exactly. More like a scrawled outline of a route that didn't match any official trails. The top corner read, "Lantern Wake, don't step past the stone ring. If they glow red, it's already too late." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I Googled everything I could: folklore forums, park archives, local legends. The only thing I found was a single page on an abandoned blog about backwoods myths. The Lantern Wake, described as ghost lights that mark a burial ground for a people who never died properly. It sounded like Appalachian campfire nonsense, but Jamie had written that note, and I had nothing left to lose. The drive took most of a day. Jamie's trailhead was off a disused forestry access road in Bath County. Nothing but gravel, ruts, and mossy wooden posts older than me. I parked at the same spot his car had been found. The air smelled damp and metallic. The trees leaned like they'd been forced to grow inward. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I had a compass, a printed map of the area, and Jamie's note. I also wore a GPS tracker on my wrist, a precaution, or maybe a concession to how badly this could go. I packed for 2 nights and started in. At first, it was just woods. Familiar, if a bit suffocating. The trail faded quickly, replaced by soft animal tracks and broken brush. I followed the sketch map closely, looking for landmarks. A curved ridge line, an outcrop shaped like a tusk, a mossy boulder with a split down the middle. By late afternoon, I reached it. The hollow, a wide, natural basin surrounded by black locust trees and thick underbrush. At its center sat a perfect circle of stones, no taller than my knee. There were 13 of them, each smoothed by time, all evenly spaced. I remembered Jamie's words, "Don't step past the stone ring." So I didn't. I set up camp just outside it. No fire, just a protein bar, my sleeping bag, and the sound of wind shifting through bone-dry leaves. The forest got quiet after sunset. Not peaceful quiet, strained. I've heard quiet before on trails, the kind that comes when nature rests. This was different, oppressive, heavy like sound had been sucked out of the air. That's when I saw the lights. At first I thought it was another hiker, a flashlight bobbing in the distance. But it wasn't white. It was yellow, candle-colored. Then another appeared, and another. No footsteps, no shadows. Just orbs like floating lanterns drifting between the trees. They circled the stone ring, flickering gently, as if they were breathing. I stayed still, heart hammering in my ribs. I remembered what Jamie wrote. Don't step in. Don't follow. They stayed until just before dawn, then winked out. The next day, I was exhausted, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to know more. I walked the perimeter of the hollow and noticed something strange. Every tree within 30 feet of the stone ring was dead. Not cut, not fallen, just dead, bark blackened, no leaves, and all of them leaning slightly toward the center. Then I saw the bones, laid out in careful spirals at the base of 3 trees. Small, animal maybe, or something close. Each spiral had ash in the middle, and tiny red threads knotted around a central vertebrae. I took a photo. My hands were shaking. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I tried writing notes, sketching what I saw, even recording a voice memo on my phone, but the screen kept freezing. By dusk, I decided to leave the hollow and make camp higher up on the ridge. That was my mistake. I didn't make it 50 yards before I noticed the shift. The trees had changed. They were closer together, their trunks warped and gnarled like melted wax. I turned around, and the path behind me was gone. I walked in a circle for almost an hour before I realized I was back at the stone ring. Only now the stones had shifted. One was missing, and in its place sat a boot, a hiking boot, caked in dirt, tattered at the laces, and inside was a foot, still wrapped in a sock, skin mummified. Jamie's boot. I recognized the patch he'd sewn onto the heel. My knees gave out. The forest darkened too fast, as if the sun had dropped straight from the sky. And then the lights returned. Only this time, they were red. Dozens of them, blood-colored, flickering violently as they moved faster, closer. They circled me, spun, flashed, and then they stopped. From the trees stepped something I still can't describe without my throat tightening. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, limbs like willow branches, skin gray and veined like old marble. Its face was stretched over a flat skull, with a mouth that split too wide and eyes that never stayed in one place, constantly shifting, sliding, spinning. It didn't speak, but I felt words in my head like nails driven into soft wood. He stayed. Now you do. I tried to run. I remember screaming, and then nothing. I woke up lying on a different trail, morning sun filtering through the trees. My pack was intact, phone full battery, GPS tracker showing I'd never left the entry point. I should have felt relief, but the camera roll, empty, except for one new photo I don't remember taking. It shows me asleep next to the stone ring, and standing behind me, the gray figure, smiling. I left Virginia that day. Haven't set foot in a forest since. Jamie's still listed as presumed deceased. No remains were ever found. No record of my GPS entering the hollow. But last week, a new package arrived. No return address. Just my name. Inside, Jamie's patch. The one from his boot. And a note, written in his handwriting. The stones shift when they're hungry. I'm Mariah, 41, freelance botanical photographer, mostly working on low-budget nature documentaries and stock image gigs. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me work alone, which I've come to prefer. After my dad passed last winter, I spiraled a bit. Couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't tell a red maple from a sourwood, which is kind of my whole job. So I booked a solo trip, hoping to shoot some rare woodland flora while clearing my head. Fern Creek Forest in the Allegheny Highlands wasn't exactly famous. Too remote, too rugged, and barely marked on tourist maps. But that was the point. Quiet, dense, and allegedly untouched in parts. I'd read a short blurb about it in an old ecological journal. Temperate hardwood forest, high fern density, mixed old-growth stands. Minimal trail activity. It felt promising. I planned for 5 days. Left my itinerary with my cousin Eva in Charleston. Packed smart. My Nikon, backup batteries, water purifier, trail mix, bear spray, flare gun, solar charger, and printed topographical maps. No cell signal was expected, but I brought my offline GPS and a compass just in case. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The trails were narrow but clear. I caught shots of trillium in bloom, a timber rattler coiled under a rock ledge, and some bright orange chicken of the woods fungi clinging to a downed tree. I barely saw another person, just a couple in neon windbreakers who looked lost and waved vaguely before hurrying past. Then came day 3. I'd been aiming for a glade marked Lookout Hollow, a wide clearing with reputed fern carpets and morning mist perfect for low-angle shots. The main trail would have taken me there by midday, but about 2 hours in, I noticed an unmarked branch off, just a narrow path veering left into denser trees. The ground was still packed down like it had been walked before, but there were no signs or ribbons. Just a weirdly symmetrical break in the underbrush and a carved wooden post that had clearly lost whatever plaque it once held. I hesitated, consulted the printed map. Nothing. GPS didn't register it either. Still, it looked promising. And the glade I was headed to? Maybe overrated. Maybe already crawling with those windbreaker types. I figured, detours lead to discoveries. It's how I got my best footage of the lunar moth cluster last summer. So I turned. Almost immediately the air thickened. The temperature dropped just enough to notice. The bird chatter cut out, not all at once, but slowly like someone turning down the volume. No rustling leaves, no insect whines. Just my boots crunching over brittle ground. Then came the smell. It was the moss at first, I thought, but richer, fouler. Like decaying bark mixed with wet pennies. Metallic and old. I tightened my jacket and pressed on. The trees grew closer together, gnarled and leaning like they'd been caught mid-whisper. Half an hour in, I passed an ash tree with strange slashes across the bark, for clean, deep grooves spaced too evenly to be natural. I took a photo out of habit. Something about the symmetry made me uneasy. The forest seemed to lean in behind me as I continued. That's when I saw it. A structure, not on the map, not listed in any of the old forestry archives I'd studied either. It looked like a hunter's shack, but older, pre-electric, maybe even Civil War era. Half sunken into the earth, like it had been trying to hide. The roof sagged under layers of moss and fallen branches, and a dead vine curled across the doorway like a guard dog's tail. There was no trail to it, just roots. No soot, no tools, no fire pit, but something about it pulled me in, not out of curiosity, more like pressure, a quiet compulsion behind the ribs. The door was already ajar. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the temperature dipped again. The air spilling out of the doorway wasn't wind. It was still, damp, and cold like the breath of a mine shaft. I nudged the door open with my tripod. Inside, it looked like someone had left in the middle of a task and never returned. A wooden table stood in the center, one leg cracked, surrounded by moldy books and yellowed paper. A dozen jars lined a shelf on the back wall, some still sealed with wax, contents unidentifiable, dark, viscous, lumpy. One had something floating. I aimed my flashlight toward the scattered papers. Most were ruined, water-warped and blackened at the edges, but some bore legible scrawls in a wild, looping hand. Over and over. The shade waits. It learns your scent. That was enough. I turned to leave, but something creaked. Behind me, sharp, like a floorboard under weight. I spun around. No one. But the air had changed. Denser. A low hum buzzed beneath the silence, just barely perceptible, like an electrical line under tension. My heart raced. I backed out the door, slow and deliberate. When I got back to the spot where I'd left my backpack, it was gone. No torn straps. No signs of animals. Just a dry, perfect outline in the leaf litter where it had been. I felt a cold pinch in my gut. I reached for my compass. The needle floated lazily in circles. I pulled out the GPS black screen. I tapped it. Nothing. Tried the solar charger. Dead. Then I noticed it. The trail, the way I'd come. Gone. Vanished like it had never been there. All around me now. Trees, trees, and more trees. Tall. Identical. Still. I spun in place, trying to find anything familiar. The ash tree, a rock pile, a snapped branch. Nothing. Panic crawled up my spine. I picked a direction and started walking. No point in calling for help. No cell, and the woods swallowed sound. Even my breathing felt muffled. I moved fast, snagged my jacket twice, cut my hand on bramble, didn't stop, kept walking until my legs screamed and the sky turned pink. I found a patch of relatively flat ground and pitched my tent with trembling fingers. No fire, no food, just a nylon shell between me and whatever was out there. That night, I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. Not footsteps, exactly, more like the soft press of weight against moss. Deliberate, circling. I held my breath. Then came the breathing, right outside the tent. Slow, wheezy, unnatural, like someone drowning from the inside. It paused, then pressed against the tent wall. I could see the silhouette through the fabric. A tall, hunched figure, with limbs too long and a head cocked to one side like it was listening. I didn't scream, didn't move, just gripped the knife in my palm until I could feel blood pooling from my own grip. Eventually it retreated. The sound faded into nothing. When dawn finally broke, I unzipped the tent cautiously. My pack was sitting in the exact spot it had disappeared from. Clean, zipped, dry. I didn't stop to think. I packed and walked. Didn't drink, didn't snack. I just moved, pausing only when my legs threatened collapse. Around sunset, I finally stumbled across a small wooden sign, half buried in moss. Front Creek Ranger Station, 1 mile. I collapsed into their front desk like a ghost. The woman behind the counter blinked, asked if I needed water. I muttered something about getting turned around. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but an older ranger standing by the wall perked up. Tall, weathered, beard like rusted steel wool. He studied me for a beat, then asked quietly, "You take that split past Devil's Saddle?" I blinked. "I think so. Just a narrow trail. Didn't look like much." He nodded once, slow. Wasn't supposed to still be visible. "What's back there?" He scratched his neck. "We call it the scent trail. Locals don't mark it. Some say it wasn't a trail originally. It was a trap." "A trap?" I asked, still lightheaded. He glanced out the window. "Not for animals." I didn't ask more. I stayed at a local inn that night. Locked the windows. Kept the lights on. My phone worked fine again. Compass too, like nothing had ever happened. But that wasn't true. I still hear that breath sometimes. Not in dreams, in waking moments. When I'm editing a video and the room goes quiet, or when I step outside and the wind dies down. I've tried to rationalize it. Trauma, stress, hallucination. But I haven't been back to the woods. Not once. Not even for work. Because I know now, some places rewrite the rules. They don't follow maps or physics. They shift. They trap. And worse, they remember you. My name's Darian McLeod. I'm 39, a cartographer by trade, though that sounds more adventurous than it is. These days, it just means squinting at satellite overlays and updating GPS databases for an app company based out of Raleigh. Most of my work is remote, but sometimes I get assigned field work to verify old or disputed terrain markers. I don't mind. It's quiet, mostly, and a good excuse to get out of my own head. Last October, right as the leaves began turning in southern Appalachia, I was sent on one of these assignments. It was supposed to be routine. Hike out to a few disputed forest boundaries in Monroe County, West Virginia, and log the terrain coordinates. I'd be in and out in 5 days max. The client wanted it cross-referenced with 1970s Forest Service maps that were inconsistent. My job was to make them line up. So I packed light. Compass, trail maps, a portable GPS company issued, my gear, and a .38 revolver I always carry, just in case I meet something with more teeth than curiosity. I didn't expect trouble. I don't believe in the old stories, the weird ones locals tell about mountains that rearrange themselves or voices that follow you between the trees. I've worked plenty of forest jobs, some of them in stranger places. But this was different. At a ranger station near Blue Lick Trailhead, an older ranger with leathery skin and a crooked jaw handed me a folded paper map before I headed out. "If your tech fails," he said, tapping the crease, "this'll keep you out of Shadewalker Pass." I raised an eyebrow. not planning on heading into any passes. Just plotting markers. He nodded but didn't smile. Still, that area moves. I assumed he meant landslides or elevation confusion. I thanked him and left. 3 days in, everything was going fine. Foggy mornings, damp leaf cover, enough wildlife to make things feel alive. I pitched my tent near a narrow creek that night, close to a downed chestnut tree. Checked coordinates. Logged some notes. Ate a protein bar and wrote in my field journal that everything felt remarkably still. That word, still, would come back to haunt me. Day 4, I tried to take a shortcut between 2 marker points. Nothing major. Just a detour to save time. That's when I noticed the terrain didn't match the overlay on my screen. Slopes appeared where none should have. The ridgeline curled east instead of west, and one particular path wasn't on any map, not even the 1970s topo. It ran north between 2 tall pine walls, dark, crooked pines that leaned slightly inward like they were listening. I should have turned back, but the trail looked walkable, and my curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was a logging route long abandoned. About 30 minutes in, the birds stopped singing. Not faded. Stopped. Even my own footsteps sounded wrong. Too loud, like walking inside a tunnel padded with bark. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. A stale, wet cold, like a cellar sealed for decades. I was just about to turn back when I saw the post. Weathered. Splintered. Not a signpost, but something older. A crude totem carved from a single beam of wood. It had 7 vertical notches gouged into its front, each at slightly different angles. Hanging from a rusty nail was a piece of fabric, sun-bleached and stiff. Something about it reminded me of an old child's shirt. I took a picture. That was the last moment I felt normal. 10 minutes later, my GPS froze. The screen stayed lit, but none of the data changed. I tried to restart, nothing. I reached for my compass. The needle spun in slow, aimless circles, like it was drifting on a lazy river. The trees started to repeat. I passed the same stump 3 times, no matter which direction I walked. I remember brushing against a birch with a lightning scar down its center, then seeing it again. And again. The trail underfoot shifted from hard-packed dirt to soft, unmarked loam, then vanished entirely. At some point, I realized I was back where I started. Only now the totem was gone. Not broken. Not moved. Gone. My tent, my gear, my entire base camp, gone too. Just flat forest floor where they should have been. I didn't panic, not yet. I'm trained to handle being off trail. I sat down, pulled out the paper map the ranger had given me. Shadewalker Pass was circled in red, and my finger hovered near it. I'd gone farther than I thought. That's when I first heard it. A voice. No, not quite a voice. A sound trying to imitate one. It said, Darien. Soft. Confused. Like a child repeating a name it didn't fully understand. I stood up too fast, heart thudding. Spun in place. The woods were still. My breath fogged the air, but no wind moved the trees. Then crunch. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from behind. I turned. Nothing. I turned again. There was just barely a shape, half hidden behind a pine. Tall, slender, with 2 long arms that ended just above the knees. No face, just the suggestion of one, blurred, smooth, as if melted under a hot sun. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt it learning me. I ran. I don't remember which direction. I tore through underbrush, slipped down a rocky embankment, landed hard on my elbow. Scrambled back up. My knee was bleeding, but I didn't care. I ran until I saw the cabin. It shouldn't have been there. A structure in the middle of an unmarked hollow. No trail leading in or out. Just there, tucked under a canopy of drooping spruce. A single, dim lantern flickered in the window, casting long, warped shadows. I should have kept running, but part of me thought someone might be inside. Someone who could explain this. The door creaked open before I touched it. Inside was cramped, cluttered with old newspaper stacks and broken furniture. A single chair faced the hearth, where embers smoldered low. Sitting in it was a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was dry like peeled bark. His eyes were wide open, filmed over in gray. But his lips moved. "You looked," he whispered. I backed away. "You heard it too. What is it?" I asked before I could stop myself. His mouth widened. Not in a smile, in hunger. "The walker of names," he croaked. "If it learns yours, it keeps you." I turned to leave, but the door was gone. Gone. Not closed. Gone. A wall of wood where the exit had been. I don't remember what happened next. I awoke on a gravel road outside the ranger station, bruised, filthy, and missing 3 toenails. They said they'd found me wandering, eyes open but unresponsive, repeating coordinates that didn't exist. My gear was never recovered. That was 10 months ago. I moved to Las Vegas. I live on the 9th floor of a downtown building, surrounded by lights and traffic and noise. I keep every window locked. I sleep with a white noise machine on full blast. I haven't opened a map since. Sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I hear it again. Not my name this time. Just a voice, any voice, calling out someone's name, slowly, experimentally, like it's practicing. I was 33 when it happened. Back then, I worked security on the graveyard shift for a hydroelectric plant near Burnt Hill, North Carolina. Not exactly thrilling work, but it came with quiet hours, decent pay, and long stretches of time off. Time I usually spent wandering the woods. I wasn't a full-blown wilderness nut, but I liked the silence, the routine of it. I'd go camping at least twice every fall. No phones, no highways, just trees and time to forget I existed. That year, I'd planned a 3-day hike with my older brother, Clay. We'd been doing these getaways since we were kids, just 2 knuckleheads in the Pisgah National Forest, pretending we knew what we were doing. Clay was always the trailblazer between us. If I brought the stove, he brought the stories. We were supposed to hike up into a part of the forest known as Clatterbone Ridge. Not a name that pops up on many maps, but old-timers used to call it that because of how the trees groaned when the wind moved through them. Clay had heard about a hidden lake past the ridge from some guy at a bait shop. Of course, he wanted to be the first to find it. He headed up a day early to secure a good camp spot and promised to text when he'd settled in. That afternoon, I got a photo from him. His old Jeep parked in front of a battered sign that just said, "Bitter Run Trailhead." His message? "Got the fire pit ready. Bring whiskey." I never got another text after that. When I arrived the next evening, his Jeep was still there. Engine running. Driver's door wide open. The lights were on, and the radio was playing static. I remember the way the dashboard flickered, like the battery was struggling, but it had been on for hours. Inside the Jeep, his gear was untouched. His backpack sat in the passenger seat. Phone dead. A can of jerky half-eaten in the console. No signs of a struggle. No blood. Not even a scuff mark in the dirt. I waited by the vehicle for half an hour, thinking maybe he'd just gone off trail to scout something nearby. When he didn't come back, I grabbed my pack and headed up Bitter Run alone. The trail was steeper than I remembered. Trees seemed taller, darker. I kept scanning the ground for his boot prints, but the leaves made everything soft and silent. The weird part was how unfamiliar it all felt. We'd hiked these parts since high school, but now it was like someone had shifted the layout. The slope of the land was wrong. Boulders I remembered were missing, while deadfall seemed unnaturally arranged, like ribs in the dirt. By the time I reached our usual site near the bend in the creek, the sun was nearly down. His tent was there, half collapsed like someone had started to pitch it and walked away. His boots sat neatly by the fire pit, soles clean. His coat was draped over a stump. A bundle of firewood had been placed just outside the tent flap, like he meant to come back at any second. But he never did. I shouted for him until my throat burned. Searched the surrounding woods and spirals with my flashlight shaking in my hand. There was no sign, just the growing sense that something had gone terribly wrong. I stayed that night, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't make myself leave. I dozed for maybe 20 minutes at a time, jumping awake at every sound. The woods weren't right. There were no insects, no owls, just the wind whispering in a voice that almost sounded like words. At dawn, I left and reported everything to the rangers. They were polite, took it seriously, sent out search parties with dogs, drones, even a chopper. They combed the ridges, followed the creek downstream, but nothing turned up. No scent trail, no gear, no Clay. Eventually they ruled it a disappearance. Most likely disoriented and fell into a ravine, they told me. It happens more than you think. But Clay didn't just disappear. He wasn't the type to wander barefoot into the woods without his boots, coat, or backpack. He was stubborn, yes, but never reckless. A week later, I went back, told everyone I just wanted closure. The truth? I'd been hearing his voice in my sleep. Not cries for help, more like distant conversations that ended too soon. I kept seeing that firewood pile by the tent in my head, like it was waiting for someone to strike a match. I packed light, flashlight, knife, flask, and one night's worth of food. I didn't plan to stay. When I stepped back into Clatterbone Ridge, the forest felt heavier. Still no birds. Still no bugs. Not even the wind this time, just dense, smothering silence. Even my breathing felt louder than it should have. I passed the camp and kept walking. I don't remember making the decision to go farther, but I did. I followed the creek upstream, deeper into a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The trees grew wider apart, but their trunks curved inward like they were craning their necks toward me. That's when I heard it. Not a branch. Not an echo. My voice. Over here. Same inflection. Same scratchy throat. It came from just beyond the next rise. I should have run, but I didn't. I climbed the hill and stepped into a hollow I swear hadn't been there before. In the center of it stood a structure. Round. Primitive. Built from fat logs and blackened mortar. No windows. The door was open, waiting. The entire outside was marked with jawbones, deer skulls, vertebrae, arranged in loops and lines like a hunter's shrine gone wrong. I stepped inside. The air was icy. Still, there was something standing in the middle of the room. Barefoot, shirtless, facing away from me. Same height as Clay. Same haircut. Same slope of the shoulders. Clay, I whispered. He turned. It looked like him. Almost. But the smile was too wide, stretched at the edges. The eyes were empty, unfocused. And the voice, when it spoke, was mine again. You came back, it said. Then it took a step forward. That's when I saw the carvings on its skin. Dozens of jagged symbols cut into its chest and arms, leaking a thick, tar-like fluid. Its body moved like it was puppeteered, stiff, delayed, unsure how joints were meant to bend. I backed away. It followed. You brought me with you, it said in Clay's voice this time. That night. Another step. Another smile. I turned and ran. Don't remember the path. Don't remember falling, but I must have. My jeans were torn and soaked with mud when I burst back onto Bitter Run Trail. The Jeep was still there, engine running. Same mileage. Same flickering dash clock, frozen at the same time it had been when I found it. I drove straight to a friend's place in Asheville. Never went back to Burnt Hill. Quit my job 2 weeks later. Moved west. Figured dry air and distance would keep it out. But it didn't. The dream started first. Clay's voice calling from somewhere behind my door. Then it escalated. I started hearing myself. Not in my head, out loud. In the hallway. Sometimes in the kitchen, when I'm standing in the shower. And then last week, a package arrived. No label. No return address. Just a small, cloth-wrapped object. Inside was half of a deer's jawbone. Still wet. Still red. The teeth clattered in my palm when I touched it. I checked with the post office. No record. No shipment. No barcode. And I knew. That thing from the ridge, it wasn't finished. I think it needs a second half. Not just a face to wear, a voice to call home. And it's trying to use mine. Now I don't sleep. I've taken the mirrors down in my apartment because sometimes I see things in them that don't move when I do. Sometimes they speak before I open my mouth. I'm writing this because I've decided to go back. Not to find Clay, I know he's gone. I'm going back to seal the place. To end it, if I can. I don't expect to return. But if you ever hike up into Clatterbone Ridge and hear your own voice whispering from the brush, don't answer it. Don't follow it. Don't believe it. Because it's not trying to find you. It's trying to replace you. I'm not sure if I'm writing this to warn someone, or to make sure I didn't hallucinate the whole thing. My name's Eli Shaver. I was 22 when it happened, about 2 years ago now. And even though I've tried to bury the memory under therapy sessions and denial, Birchmarrow still shows up in my dreams, uninvited and unchanged. Back then, I was in the middle of my 3rd semester at a community college just outside Morgantown, West Virginia. I was scraping by with part-time shifts at a hardware store and a GPA that wouldn't survive another round of midterms. My roommate, Jonah, said I looked like a peeled ghost. "You need the woods, man," he told me one night. "Clean air, firelight, silence, like a reset button." The timing worked out. His cousin Dina had a friend who owned a property near Low Gap, nestled in a deep cut of the Alleghenies. No cell towers, no traffic, not even a proper address, just a rough set of GPS coordinates and a local trailhead sign that said Birchmarrow Trail, not maintained. Perfect, we thought. So it was me, Jonah, Dina, Dina's boyfriend Tyler, Tyler's sister Ivy, and Ivy's weird friend Ash. 6 of us in a beat-up Ford Explorer with half the shocks blown and enough gear for a week, even though we were only staying 2 nights. We left that Friday afternoon, taking turns DJing from Spotify until we lost signal halfway through the mountains. Dina had a screenshot of the route. The road thinned into gravel, then dirt, winding along a narrow ridge with drop-offs and no guardrails. We had to get out and move fallen branches more than once. The sun dipped behind the hills before we saw the cabin. Cabin is generous. It looked like someone had built a tool shed in the 1940s and then decided to live in it. A narrow A-frame with tar-black shingles and vines climbing up one side like veins. The door hung crooked on its hinges. A single lantern flickered on the porch. Solar, maybe? No one said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. This feels wrong. But Jonah laughed it off. Looks haunted. I love it. Inside, it was dust and would rot. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a fireplace full of ashes, and faded curtains that reeked of mildew. There was no electricity, just a few half-melted candles and a wind-up flashlight. Still, we unpacked. Tyler got the fire going. Ivy started boiling water over a propane stove. Dina opened a bottle of wine, and soon we were laughing, sharing ghost stories, roasting sausages on metal skewers. For a while, it felt like what we'd come for. Then, somewhere around 10 p.m., I started feeling watched. It was subtle at first. That prickly awareness you get when you think someone's standing behind you. The fire cracked too loud. The woods grew too still. I glanced toward the treeline and froze. There was something standing just beyond the firelight. A figure, tall, unmoving. I nudged Jonah. "You see that?" He squinted. Probably a deer, but it didn't move like one. In fact, it didn't move at all. It just stood there, completely still. Then Ivy stood up and called out, "Dina, is that you?" Dina had gone inside 5 minutes ago to grab more mugs. A second later, she stepped out onto the porch holding a bottle. "Why are you yelling?" We turned back toward the woods. The figure was gone. Jonah's jaw tightened. "You saw it move, right?" "No," I said. "It didn't move. It just disappeared." We put the fire out and went inside. Checked the locks, not that any of them worked. Tyler found an old shotgun above the mantel. Dina swore it was unloaded, but we found shells in a drawer next to yellowed newspapers and a broken clock. We tried to act normal, played cards, told jokes, but nobody was laughing anymore. Later that night, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I heard Ivy call out, "Hey, who's by the shed?" Everyone else was inside. We ran to the front room and looked through the warped glass of the window. Someone was standing near the woodshed, close enough to touch it. Their back was turned to us, but something was wrong. Their head was tilted sideways, unnaturally far, like a snapped branch. One arm hung limp. The other was dragging across the shed wall, fingers bent at sharp angles. And then it turned. Its face looked borrowed. like it had tried to copy Ivy's but got the ratios wrong. The mouth hung open, too wide, teeth like gray gravel. Then it opened its arms and screamed. Except the scream didn't come from outside. It came from beneath us. Boards trembled. Nails popped. The air filled with this deep, guttural moan, like something old and hungry breathing up through the floor. Tyler stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Dina screamed. Ash dropped a candle, and it rolled across the floor, flickering wildly. The figure outside began moving forward. Not walking, jerking, like a marionette yanked by tangled strings. I loaded the shotgun with trembling hands. Dropped one shell. Couldn't find it again. Jammed the others in, and clicked the safety off. Then it spoke, in my voice. Eli, it said flatly. Eli, like it was reading a script. No question, just the name. Then it laughed, a scratchy, high-pitched giggle, like someone playing a recording backwards. And it began mimicking things I'd said earlier that day, word for word. Stupid little jokes. A complaint about the coffee, an old nickname from high school. Perfectly matched. Jonah snapped, threw the front door open and fired. The echo rang through the trees. Silence followed. No scream. No body. Just fog curling across the porch like it had always been there. No one slept. We huddled in the living room, backs to the wall, passing around the shotgun like a life preserver. Sometime after 3 a.m., the smell hit us. Rotten meat. Sweet. Wet. Clung to our clothes and hair. Made the air thick and oily. Jonah puked in the sink. Ivy cried. Ash kept whispering, "It's not real, it's not real," like a mantra. Then everything stopped. No sound. No smell. Just silence again. At first light, we grabbed our stuff and bolted. Didn't wait to cook. Didn't bother folding blankets. Dina had the keys. Jonah drove. We didn't look back. Halfway down the ridge, our phones buzzed signal again. Mine had one missed call. From my number. I shouldn't have listened. The voicemail was 47 seconds of wet, labored breathing. Then my voice. "Let me in." Then a sound like the cabin door creaking open. We never went back. Dina blocked the guy who owned the place. Jonah switched majors. Ivy moved to Oregon and stopped replying to texts. We don't talk about birch marrow anymore. But 2 nights ago, I found something on my windowsill. A piece of wood. Pale. Knotted. It looked like skin. I'm Noah Bramley. And if you're wondering whether I still take solo contracts after what happened in Alder's Draw, no. No, I don't. Back in 2021, I was working seasonal gigs with a land management nonprofit that partnered with the state. My specialty was fire trail reclamation, restoring overgrown access routes and maintaining old watch stations in remote forest corridors. It didn't pay great, but I loved it. Solitude. Purpose. The smell of pine and diesel on my gloves instead of stale office air. That autumn, I got sent out to a site straddling the West Virginia-Ohio border, near the outskirts of the Allegheny Plateau. Not a national park, but a long-forgotten tract of state-managed forest land called Alder's Draw. You won't find it on many maps. Just a blip west of some dead coal towns and a handful of trailers clinging to creek beds. The job was supposed to be simple. Assess the structural integrity of an old fire lookout cabin and clear the service trail leading up to it. The last record showed it hadn't been touched in nearly 14 years. No plumbing, no electric, no mapped access. It had fallen off the ledger entirely until a new forestry in turn rediscovered it during drone sweeps. I accepted the contract without blinking. I always did. Back then, the more remote the job, the more peace I found. They dropped me in by air. The forest was too overgrown for vehicle access, and even ATVs would have chewed up the terrain. As the chopper lifted away, something inside me dropped. Not just anxiety. It felt like static, like the woods around me had absorbed the rotor noise and let the silence settle too fast. I stood still long enough to realize I could hear my own blood pumping. The cabin was about a half-mile uphill from the drop site. When I got there, It looked like someone had dragged it from the belly of a fevered dream. The tin roof was bowed inward, sun-bleached and rust-eaten. Moss hung off the siding like wet hair, and the front door was roped shut with a decaying piece of nylon. But it stood. For walls, elevated floor, wood stove, storage bins, basic but workable. The first 2 days were standard. I cleared brush, marked reentry points, inventoried supplies from the old Ranger cache. Inside, I found a brittle spiral logbook with Ranger entries dating back to the late 90s. Mostly mundane, weather notes, wildlife sightings, and one entry that caught my eye. November 3rd, '07, whispers again last night. Came from below. Not wind. Not animal. Felt it in my teeth. Not reporting. Last time they said I was hallucinating from stress. Screw that. I chalked it up to burnout. Long-term station duty can do weird things to your head. Then came night 3. It started with a sound. A faint clicking tick tick tick. Always 3 beats. It came from somewhere just past the tree line. Too deliberate for wind. Too soft for a woodpecker. I stepped outside with my headlamp. The beam caught nothing but brush and layered shadow. I swung it left. Right. Nothing. The moment I turned around, tick tick tick. Behind me again. Right at the edge of the reach. Just far enough to stay hidden. I slept with my hatchet that night. Not under my pillow, on my chest. The next morning, there were stones on the threshold. 3 small ones stacked like a cairn, smooth and bone-white. Balanced perfectly. I stared for a long time. Kicked them off the step. Told myself erosion maybe did it. Squirrels. Gravity. Anything. Later that day, I climbed a ridge near the cabin, trying to get a signal on the sat phone. The antenna only worked if I held it in the exact right angle. Arm extended like a scarecrow on a cliff. I managed to send a check-in ping, barely 1 bar of connection. On the hike back, I saw something that hadn't been there before. A trail. It wasn't overgrown like the others I'd cleared. It was too clean. Like something had recently swept the leaves aside. No flags. No blazes. No hoof prints or boot tracks. Still I followed it. It led downhill for maybe 20 minutes before I came to a clearing. At its center stood a single dead tree, jet black, leafless, brittle. Its bark looked scorched, but the ground around it showed no fire damage. The trunk twisted upward like a spinal column frozen mid-writhe. Around the tree, stones. Dozens. Arranged in spirals, semicircles, and figures that looked like runes or sigils. Some were stained red. Others had bones wedged between them. Birds, small mammals, maybe a raccoon. My skin crawled. I turned around to leave, and heard it again. Tick, tick, tick. Closer. Then a whisper, low and breathless, but not from the air. I felt it behind my teeth. It wasn't sound. It was sensation. Leave them. I ran. Back at the cabin, I locked the door, dragged a metal shelf in front of it, and shut every window flap. I didn't sleep. Just watched the corners and listened. At some point past midnight, I heard whispering again. This time it was words, repeated in a voice not quite human. Too dry, too stretched. Leave them. Leave them. Leave them. Over and over. Until just before dawn. I opened the cabin door at first light. On the doorknob were 3 stacked stones, but this time, balanced on top was a deer skull, clean and hollowed out. No flesh. No fur. The eye sockets had been filled with dirt, like someone buried something behind its gaze. That broke me. I hiked back up the ridge to try an emergency call, but the sat phone shorted out as soon as I powered it on. The screen flickered, then died. 1 bar of battery. No connection. I shoved it in my bag and started running. No trail. I just picked a direction and followed a dry creek bed downhill, half hiking, half falling, until the trees got denser and the sunlight thinned into gray. I made it back to the cabin just before sundown. Didn't light a fire. Didn't unpack. That night, it came closer. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I saw something standing at the edge of the clearing. Tall. Bent. It looked like a man from a distance, but the limbs were too long, the neck tilted too far to one side, like it was listening to a sound I couldn't hear. Its head resembled a hollowed tree stump with ridged edges and no face. It swayed, then blinked forward. Not stepped, not walked. Blink. It was suddenly 20 feet closer. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just sat in the dark with my hands gripping the hatchet, and I felt it tick inside me. Tick, 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 like something tapping on the inside of my ribs. Then I heard something that haunts me still. From the space behind my ears, not outside. I hear the roots. Do you? I passed out. Woke up in daylight. Alone. The inside of the cabin's front window was smeared with something dark, maybe blood, maybe sap, and written in it were the words, "He never left." I packed my gear in minutes. Didn't care what I left behind. I ran until my legs gave out, then crawled until I saw the ranger outpost in the distance. They said I looked like hell, mud-caked, eyes bloodshot, dehydrated and muttering. I couldn't form full sentences for hours. The forestry office said no one had been assigned to Alder's Draw in over a decade. No active contracts. No personnel records under my job number. But I had the satellite key, the logbook, the site codes, the documentation. They blamed it on isolation psychosis. Said being alone for too long in places like that can fracture reality. Maybe they're right. Maybe I cracked out there. But every now and then, I'll find 3 stones stacked perfectly on my back porch. Balanced. Deliberate. And every time I lie down at night, I hear it again. Tick. 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 Like a knuckle knocking gently from somewhere deep inside the earth. My name's Ben Whitmore. I was 27 when this happened, old enough to know better, young enough to believe that solitude could fix everything. I worked as a technician for a fiber optic company outside Roanoke. Spent most of my days underground, threading cable through tight crawl spaces under dead shopping plazas. That kind of job makes you crave fresh air. But it wasn't just that. My sister had stopped talking to me after an ugly Thanksgiving fight. My girlfriend had left 3 weeks later, and the weight of it all felt like someone had set up camp in my chest. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't even eat without everything tasting like styrofoam. That's when I found Saddlehorn Pines. It was a barely marked patch of forest outside Wythe County, not far from the West Virginia line, past an old fire tower and a creek called Houndstooth Run. I'd found the trail mentioned in an old hiker's blog. Said it was primitive, peaceful, and forgotten. Sounded perfect. So I packed up a weekend's worth of gear, loaded my ancient Subaru, and drove into the green emptiness. I signed the register at the trailhead and stepped into the woods with no reception, no deadlines, no noise. The first 2 days were incredible. Just wind in the leaves, birdsong, and the satisfying crunch of boots on dry pine needles. I set up camp each night just off the trail, filtered water from a small stream, cooked ramen over a tiny stove, and scribbled half-thoughts into a spiral notebook. I felt human again. Then I saw him. It was near dusk on the 3rd day. I was boiling water when I heard someone walking through the trees. Not stealthy, deliberate, like they wanted me to hear. A man stepped into view about 20 yards from my camp. He was tall and wiry, with a pale, sun-faded face and eyes too deep in his skull. His clothes looked thrown together from thrift bins, ragged camo, fraying denim, and cracked leather boots that looked waterlogged. A long blade dangled from his hip in a worn sheath patched with duct tape and twine. He grinned when he saw me. Not wide, just enough to make me feel like I'd stepped into the second act of something he'd been rehearsing for a while. "Evenin'," he said. I stood up slowly. "Hey, everything all right?" He didn't answer right away. Just scanned my camp like he was counting things. Didn't expect to see anybody out this way. Not many walk Saddlehorn anymore. I didn't respond. My gut had gone cold. "You campin' alone?" he asked. I lied. Said my brother was just up the trail, checking out an old fire road. The man didn't blink. Just nodded once, slow. "That right." Then he tilted his head. "Mind if I roll out nearby?" "Won't bother you." I didn't want to say yes. But something about the way he stared, like he was measuring my response, made no feel dangerous. "Sure," I said. "Public land." He didn't have a tent. No sleeping bag. Just a filthy wool blanket that he spread out beside a fallen log. He sat cross-legged beside my fire without saying another word, muttering occasionally. Not words I recognized, just rhythms. Like he was repeating the sound of something he'd heard long ago. That night, I zipped my tent tight, kept my multi-tool under my pillow, and slept maybe 20 minutes total. I kept hearing his breathing just outside, long and steady. Never erratic, never shifting, just there. In the morning, he was already awake, squatting beside the creek, staring into it like it held answers. He didn't greet me, didn't move when I packed up. "You headed on?" he asked eventually, not looking at me. "Yeah, long way to go. You sure you want company?" "I hike better solo," I muttered. He stood slowly, stretching just enough to make his joints crack. "A lot of folks go missing in these woods." I didn't answer. I hiked hard that day, ignored my water rations. My knees were jelly by the time the sun dipped below the trees, but I didn't stop. I didn't feel safe lighting a fire. I chewed a protein bar in the dark and climbed into my bag still fully clothed, knife clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other. In the early hours, I smelled something. Sweet, like rotting apples and wet fur. I unzipped the tent flap slowly. A squirrel lay on the ground outside, dead. Its belly sliced clean open, organs removed, limbs stretched out neatly, like it had been posed. No footprints, no drag marks, just the squirrel. I buried it under rocks and left in a hurry. I didn't stop for water or rest. By mid-afternoon, my vision was swimming, and every shadow looked like someone waiting. That night, I stumbled across an old forest lean-to, 3 walls, moss-covered roof, initials carved into every surface. I thought about pressing on, but my legs wouldn't listen. I settled in, ate the last of my food, and kept my knife beside me. I didn't even try to sleep, just stared into the woods and waited. Then the woods went quiet. No crickets, no wind, nothing but the sound of my own heart. Then the whistle, 2 notes, soft, playful. It echoed off the trees like it had been waiting for a cue. I sat up straight, knife in hand. Footsteps followed, slow and dragging. Then something heavier. A thud, a slide, a shuffle. Then his voice. "Thought I might catch up with you." I turned on my flashlight and aimed it out toward the tree line. There he was. Same clothes, same smile. Only his eyes looked darker now, like something had gone out behind them. "You sleeping yet?" he asked, swinging the knife slowly at his side. "Night like this, it's best to be still." I didn't speak. "You left real quick yesterday," he said, stepping just close enough for me to smell that same sickly sweetness. Didn't even say goodbye. He looked up at the moon, grinned wider. "Some folks don't know how to be grateful." Then, he turned and walked back into the trees. Just like that. No threat. No charge. Just walked away. I sat in that lean-to until sunrise, hands shaking, knife clenched tight. When the sky turned gray, I stood up and saw something carved into the wood above where I'd been sleeping. The words were fresh, gouged deep with something sharp. "Still listening, Dot." I ran. Didn't stop until I found a road. Flagged down a utility truck. The driver took one look at me and didn't ask questions. I told him I'd gotten sick, that I'd gotten turned around. I never reported it, never told my folks, never even unpacked that gear. It's still in the trunk of my car, muddy and mildewed. But here's the part one can't forget. What sticks in my mind when the house gets too quiet? That whistle. Those 2 notes. A month later, I heard it outside my apartment. Middle of the night. I thought I was imagining things. But when I went to the window, there was a squirrel on the porch. Split open. Perfectly posed. My name's Jonah Briggs. I don't usually start stories like that, but for this one, it feels important. Maybe so you'll believe me. Maybe so I'll believe myself. I was 34 when it happened. I'd spent the last 8 years working as a wildlife biologist, mostly field observation, habitat restoration. I'd gotten laid off that spring. Budget cuts. Government funding moved elsewhere. To cope, I decided to head out on a solo trip. Not for work this time. Just for me. Somewhere quiet. Remote. Something that would remind me I was still tethered to something real. That I wasn't just a man slowly unraveling behind a computer screen. I chose a stretch of woods near Salt Gap, Kentucky. Most folks haven't heard of it. It barely shows up on the map. A few old farmsteads, some crumbling tobacco barns, and endless hills coated in oak and hickory. The trail I found wasn't on any official registry. It was buried deep in an old forum for ultralight hikers. One of those dark-themed message boards with flashing cursors and barely moderated threads. The post just called it Switch Hollow Route, NT 105. No elevation chart. No satellite view. Just a few lines of text. Solitude guaranteed. But don't go past the stone figure. I'm serious. That was it. I should have turned back then. But I had gear, experience, and an ego that hadn't been humbled in a while. So I loaded my pack, filled up the tank, and drove out the next morning before the sun rose. Salt Gap was colder than I expected. It was late October, and frost clung to the high grass like spiderwebs dipped in glass. I parked near an old gravel pull-off, just a dirt indent beside a rusted gate with no signage. It started like any other hike, pine needles underfoot, sunlight pouring through branches in long, golden blades. The kind of stillness that only comes when you're miles from anything with a lock or a paycheck. About an hour in, I passed a small rock sculpture, waist-high, narrow, roughly humanoid. It looked like someone had stacked shale into the vague suggestion of a figure. Head, shoulders, no arms. Time had chipped away at it, but it still stood. I assumed this was the marker, the stone figure. The warning flashed in my head, and I stopped for a beat. Just long enough to feel the wind shift. Just long enough to sense the pressure of decision. But again, I pressed forward. I told myself I was just superstitious. That I was tired. That stories only have power if you let them. About 20 minutes later, the trail began to fade. The dirt path grew thinner, then patchy. Trees grew closer together, gnarled and knotty. I marked my route, ribbons of orange tape, small scratches on bark. That's when I realized the birds had stopped. No rustling, no chirping, not even the whine of insects. Just the hollow hush of still air. I slowed my pace, checked my phone. No signal. I switched to my Garmin. The screen stuttered, then shut off. I pulled out my compass. It spun, not slowly, not lazily. It whirled like something magnetic was right beneath my boots. I lifted the compass. It calmed. Lowered it. It spun again. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned back, or tried to. There was no trail, no ribbons, no scratches. The forest behind me was seamless. Identical trees, same distances, same shadows. As if the path had been zipped shut behind me. I didn't panic, not at first. I'd gotten turned around before. So I took out my water, forced calm into my bones, and began walking in what I thought was the direction I came from. The terrain warped subtly. The slope shifted even when I didn't. Trees leaned. Roots curved in spirals. At some point, I noticed the bark wasn't rough anymore. It was smooth. Not like polished wood, more like damp skin. And the smell, like wet pennies and rotting fruit. That's when I heard the whistle. 2 notes. Soft. Friendly almost. The kind of sound you'd make calling a dog back to the porch. I froze. It came again. Same 2 notes. Same distance. Just up ahead. I don't know why I followed it. I think about that a lot. Maybe it wasn't choice. Maybe once you hear it, you're already walking. 30 feet ahead, partially hidden between 2 twisted trees, I saw her. Barefoot. Standing still. Hair black as coal and dripping wet, clinging to her shoulders and back like a funeral veil. Her skin was grayish, too pale for someone living. She didn't face me, just stood, toes buried in moss. Then she whistled. Same melody. She turned. Her eyes were black, not dark, absent, as if someone had scooped the light out of them and left only space. Her face didn't register emotion, just stillness, like a mask waiting to be painted. Then she walked, slowly, between two narrow trunks. I followed. I didn't want to. I did anyway. Time broke after that. The light never changed. Shadows didn't move. There was no sense of morning or dusk, just endless amber twilight. The ground softened beneath me. Every step made a sound like suction, like the dirt didn't want to let go. Eventually, I passed beneath a stone arch, carved with markings I couldn't read, symbols that moved slightly when I stared at them too long. Beyond that, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath. Then I saw the cabin, if you can even call it that. It didn't look built, it looked grown, like trees had bent themselves into walls, hollowed out just enough to make space. The roof sagged with moss and something darker. The windows were clouded with thick, waxy layers that distorted light like wet plastic. I stepped inside. The door didn't creak. It sighed, like it had been holding its breath. Complete darkness swallowed me. My flashlight died immediately. I turned back, but the door was gone. Not closed gone. No walls. No floor. Just black. The kind of dark that is depth. That feels heavy. Then she spoke, but not out loud. In my head. Her voice was soft, not feminine. More like silk across a nerve ending. She didn't use words. She used images. I saw myself walking that trail over and over again. In different seasons, different clothes, different years. Sometimes I was a woman. Sometimes a boy. Sometimes older. But always me. Always returning. Always forgetting. I saw things buried under the forest. Shapes that breathed. Wounds in the ground that blinked open when no one watched. I saw people with hollow eyes kneeling in circles around trees that pulsed. Then she showed me herself. Once worshipped. Now starved. She doesn't live in the woods. The woods live in her. I woke up face down in mud, drenched to the bone. My boots were gone. My pack gone. My compass shattered. My GPS fried. My clothes had been slashed, like something with claws had gently tried to unwrap me. I had lost 20 pounds. My lips were cracked. My tongue swollen. It had been 3 days. I stumbled onto a dirt road, barefoot and bleeding. A trucker found me. He said I looked hollow. I didn't talk for 2 weeks after that. I filed no report. I told no friends. When my mother asked if I'd enjoyed my trip, I told her I got food poisoning at a campsite and left early. But here's what keeps me up at night. I keep finding little stones stacked outside my apartment window. Small ones. 3 at a time. I moved twice. Different cities. Different coasts. They still show up. And sometimes when I wake up around 3 a.m., I hear it. 2 notes. Soft. Patient. My name's Caleb Murdoch, and I was 24 the summer this happened. Old enough to know better, but just young enough to still do stupid things if someone said the words free food and secluded. I just quit my job at a mechanic shop in Morgantown after a blow-up with my boss, and I was crashing on a friend's couch, broke, bitter, and spiraling. That's when Uncle Ray called. He needed someone to look after his hunting cabin for 5 days while he flew to Anchorage for a moose hunt. It's in the Monongahela. Real quiet. No neighbors. No cell towers. No distractions. He said like it was a sales pitch. He had an old hound named Buddy that needed feeding, a backup generator that sometimes needed kicking, and a little chicken coop he was experimenting with. In return, I'd get the place to myself, a fridge full of venison sausage, and more eggs than I knew what to do with. I didn't hesitate. I packed that night and hit the road before dawn. Getting there wasn't hard, at first. Ray gave me directions handwritten on a torn envelope. But once I turned off the main road, I lost my GPS and had to rely on mile markers and hand-painted signs nailed to trees. It was that kind of place. The last leg of the trip was an uphill dirt trail barely wide enough for one vehicle. Trees pressed in on both sides like a curtain, and the canopy swallowed most of the light. When I reached the clearing, I felt like I'd driven into a pocket of time that the rest of the world forgot. The cabin was older than I remembered, narrow porch, rust-streaked roof, cedar logs gone gray. The woods crept right up to the back of the place. The closest neighbor was probably a crow. Ray showed me the ropes in a 10-minute crash course before tossing me the keys and heading for the airport. "Just keep the lights low at night," he said before he left. "Moths'll eat the bulbs out here." I settled in fast. The first day passed like a warm sigh. I grilled sausages, threw a tennis ball for Buddy, and napped on the porch in the kind of silence you can't find in a city. No horns, no voices, just the creaking of trees and the occasional wind brushing the leaves like a secret being whispered. Then came the first night. I woke up just past 3 a.m., not to a sound, but to the absence of one. The frogs, the owls, the breeze. It was like someone hit mute on the forest. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was pressing. My ears strained, and I felt that old animal part of myself, the one that knows when you're being watched, snap to attention. I sat up in bed and just listened. There was nothing. In the morning, I found muddy paw prints on the back steps. Far too big for Buddy, who hadn't left my side all night. These prints weren't shaped like any canine I'd seen. Long toes, almost human, but wider, with a strange arch in the middle like it had too many joints. I told myself it was a bear. Black bears wander through these parts. That's what I said out loud while my brain screamed those aren't bear tracks. The next night, I stayed up late, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the forest from the porch swing. Just after 2:30 a.m., the motion light above the shed blinked on. I stood and walked to the edge of the porch, Buddy at my heel, ears perked. The light buzzed, casting a harsh white halo over the shed's metal roof. No movement. I walked out just far enough to see around the corner. And there it was, a little bundle of sticks, moss, and feathers, propped up dead center under the light. It looked handmade, tied with some kind of black string. A lock of what looked like hair dangled from the top. Dark brown, human length. I kicked it into the trees. The next morning, the Jeep wouldn't start. I popped the hood. Battery was fine. Wiring untouched. It just refused to turn over. I walked half a mile down the trail until I got one shaky bar of service and texted Ray. No reply. Later that day, while I was splitting kindling, I found another of those bundles. This one was hanging from a nail in the chicken coop. The birds wouldn't go inside. At sunset, I burned it. That night, something climbed onto the roof. It was slow, deliberate. I could hear the wood flex with each step. Not a raccoon. Not a cat. Too heavy. It walked from one end of the roof to the other, back and forth like it was pacing. Buddy growled so low I felt it more than heard it. Then it knocked. 3 times. Sharp. Rhythmic. Knuckles on the metal roof, just above my bed. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I waited, eyes locked on the ceiling, crowbar in hand. After the knock stopped, I listened to it crawl back toward the far end of the roof and vanish into the woods. The next day, I found deep gouges along the back wall of the cabin. Claw marks, long and uneven like someone had dragged sharpened sticks along the wood. I also noticed something else, tiny piles of rocks near the porch steps, stacked in little towers. I hadn't seen them before. Now there were 5, all aligned, all pointing toward the door. That night I locked everything, boarded the windows, slept with the lights on. At exactly 2:33 a.m., the porch light clicked on, and stayed on. This time I didn't go out. I just watched through the slit in the curtains. There was something standing just beyond the light. Too tall, hunched. It rocked side to side, never crossing the threshold of light. I could feel its stare, could feel the weight of its presence like a hand pushing on my chest. It stayed there for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go cold in my hand. Then it just melted into the darkness. I didn't sleep. When the sun came up, I decided I'd had enough. I packed my bag and started hiking down the access trail. It was 8 miles to the nearest ranger station, and I didn't care if I had to walk the whole way barefoot. But after a mile, I found something blocking the path. Dozens of those stick bundles, hung from branches, tied to saplings. Some were wrapped in animal hides, others had bones, and all of them swayed gently, even though the trees were still. I turned back. The final night, I did something dumb. I asked out loud, "What do you want?" The knock came a few minutes later. This time, it was at the window, not on the wall, not the door, the window right next to where I sat. I didn't look. I just sat there and listened as the knocking turned into scratching, slow and steady. Something dragged a claw or a nail across the glass over and over. Then it stopped. I dared to peek. There was a symbol on the window in what looked like ash or soot, a crude circle with four vertical lines inside it. My stomach dropped. I had seen that symbol once before, tattooed on Ray's forearm, partly hidden under his watch. That's when it clicked. Ray knew. He didn't just need someone to watch his cabin. He needed someone else there, someone to take his place. At sunrise, the Jeep started on the first try. I didn't wait. I left everything behind and drove until I saw highway signs. I didn't answer Ray's calls. I moved out of state within the month. Took a job installing HVAC systems in Ohio. Changed my number. Changed my name on social media. 2 years later, I saw an article online. A Florida couple found dead in their woodland vacation home, deep in the Monongahela. No forced entry. No signs of trauma. Just gone. The picture of the cabin made my blood run cold. It was Ray's place. Only now it had a new porch, a fresh coat of paint, and a listing on Airbnb. They'd renamed it the Whispering Pines Retreat. Cute. I closed my laptop and threw my phone in a drawer, because lately I've been hearing something at night. Not loud, just soft, steady, measured. 3 knocks.